A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but made darn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion, even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night I was working and had a double, 2 deliveries, to take. I had $12 left in my bank, what drivers are given to use as change for cash orders, so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with a logo on it. All white sedans. This is important. I grab the order and go to the door to the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount, and he said that it wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door as the first young guy looked around, down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again and broke down the order for him, trying to keep him calm. Then the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried.
Give me your money and your keys, now.
First guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my bank, but hadn't realized the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from my left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I hadn't seen yet. The big hair kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my then 5-year-old son, who absolutely is my world.
Please don't take that. I have a picture of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please.
I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly.
Trust me. Just listen to him. You get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either.
I could tell he'd been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in, and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in a full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. Standard issue, 9mm, silver and black. Safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $70, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was all right. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911. as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind, and these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried co-workers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed, to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was to this day one of the best bosses I ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest and told him I had had 2 shots, so he sent out a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far away. We get to the station. They had suspects in custody. I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery, speeding. The BOLO had already gone out, and they matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas, and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone. My phone was in the mix, in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely reset. It unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again, although my parental instincts kicked in. I told them the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this, and to show mercy. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me he was the one talking. The other 3 denied the involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy, despite having the gun to my back, was because I asked them to go easy on him, that he was a good kid who didn't want to be there. And he was the only one confessing. Makes sense, since he had even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops, had they not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid, who put the gun to my temple, it was his 18th birthday. he got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior, and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes. I have no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he is just by looking in his eyes. He's evil incarnate. I grew up in a town full of murderers and abusers. I had never seen this kind of evil in my life. And I never want to see it again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records and asked to remain anonymous in case he ever got out. I'm so glad I did, because today I got a letter from the state. He's been released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years. It's only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior, overcrowding. This coming February. And I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we are all ready. But for his sake, let's not meet. To the woman and her family who helped me. I was a woman then. I am trans. If you see this, please know my undying gratitude for you all. It was inconvenient for you, and yet you still were late to work to help me, and I cannot thank you enough. I bought Christmas presents for your daughter, but when I went to the landlord there to find you, you had moved. I didn't want to be a creep and stalk your new place, but I'm glad you got out of that bad neighborhood. And I hope your beautiful baby girl is doing well too. I would gladly meet you again to give you the proper thanks you deserve. From the Domino's driver in Southwest Ohio. Edit. He's already got a warrant out for new crimes. I don't know the details, but I know there was another victim based on the type of crimes committed. 3 of them. He got let out February the 2nd. The warrants are from February 22nd. I've been watching his Facebook since everything was public, just making sure he was staying away from my family. I hadn't checked it since mid-February, so I checked it. I noticed he stopped posting. Since he was posting everything, including asking for smoke, and when he was going to be on Facebook, that was unusual. So I checked the records page. More violent crimes have been committed, and he's more than likely on the run. From his Facebook, it looked like he was turning around. Guess not. I feel horrible. I know I tried my hardest to make sure he stayed in. Victim services did not care to listen, basically. Now he's hurt someone else. I feel horrible for the new victim. And I know it's not, but I can't help but feel like I'm partially guilty for this. I'll keep updating as this develops. As of right now, he's on the run. Another edit, March 22nd, 2023. He is back in prison as of March the 8th for 5 charges. If victim services has ever failed, it's now. I can't help but feel guilty and horrible, like I could have done more. He's being charged with violent crimes against individuals, possession of a weapon, and homicide. Someone died by his hand. After I fought as much as I could to try to keep him locked up, I know this isn't my fault, yet I can't stop the guilt. Hopefully, this won't happen to anyone else by his hand. As of this point, it'll be years before we get a verdict, more than likely. So this may be the final update. Thank you all so much for your support. Stay safe out there, friends. It's a crazy world. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this was boring because you did them so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night, listening to music. I'd fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink on, a cigarillo, and I would just take off driving until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and was also just the right amount of spooky. Well, one night I absolutely got more than I was to bargain for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. So if I was to guess, it just had been around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy like that. It is a normal paved road, but there is really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further to becoming no houses and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously at around 3 a.m. in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal little loop around drive of the park. The night before it stormed very badly, so badly I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park. That must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous and there was no way. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way, since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road, so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me, but said they will pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in this situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization, so I realized that I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to get me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been 40 deer in this field, just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So, if I was to guess, they were about 30 yards out. This didn't really help me. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in the front of your car and seeing 80 eye reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was, because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way and about an hour and a half out from my location. Still, to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you have got to be kidding me. I understood that me, and only me, was the reason I was in the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just to make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and take a nap to pass time quick. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before, because I don't know how common it is. But there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head, telling me that I need to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in and the surrounding I was in is probably worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. A pocket knife. I was very scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck guy. I decided to not mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want to worry them more. And I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling, and had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a dick. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100+ and on top of all that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but worried. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were all still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over the field. I know they were looking into the woods by them, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in union started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds, the field was completely empty. I knew that staying in my car is what would be the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack you. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it is the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or bobcat. He gave me the tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field, waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rear view mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot I was stuck in, partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rear view mirror a man come out of the tree line behind where my car was and walk into the middle of the road, and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating. Legitimately, I lost my breath and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in this moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time, watching me as I was freaking out, looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming right up to my window and watched me as I slept. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words all these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather got worse. It was cold and grey, unheard of for Arkansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm and stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot my buddy knew, which was barely accessible with his 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. So we aimed away from civilization, which was only made up by a single spotlight and a couple hundred people, and drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it started to rain. By the time we found camp, it had turned into hail. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road, a few hundred feet long, and the rotting carcass of a VW bug. That night was spent passing a bottle around, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we were too drunk. Eventually, we did and managed to start a fire with diesel. At this point, the hail had stopped. The empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empties growing. We drank, we played cards, we passed out in our tents. The next morning, I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust-covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman was driving, a man beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back, where there used to be seats. The man stared out the window, away from us, the entire time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminated their glassy 1,000-yard stares. It's the look of crushing poverty, and you've probably only seen it in pictures. It exists in war-torn countries, the project in inner cities, and the deep south. So deep that the old gas station back in town, a place you'd probably jokingly hum the Deliverance theme, that was the city to these people. She spoke in a deep nicotine and whiskey-soaked drawl.
Y'all come from the city to do some camping? Well, I reckon that's fine. As long as you ain't doing no drugs. You ain't doing no drugs, are you?
We weren't.
You want to know how I knowed y'all was here? Seen the black helicopters flying around, and some boys were from me. See, this is my land, and they told me. Can't be too careful. I figured best check y'all out.
She started laughing. Mucus bubbled up to wet her dry cackle. The man stared out at nothing. One of the children put both hands on the window and gazed through us. His mouth hung open, and spit cut a line through the filth on the glass. He was probably 10 years old.
Y'all know Bethany? Ha! Everybody knows old Beth. Ha! Y'all go to church? Good. Ain't got no time for those who don't fear God. Why don't y'all come to church tomorrow? You can meet Bethany. It's just over that hill up there. You can't miss it. Boy, she'd like to meet y'all. They all would.
We assured her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all looked at each other and started laughing. It was just nerves. There wasn't anything funny about it. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized. But every once in a while, it goes off and you obey it without a question. Something is wrong. It started before she spoke, when I looked into her eyes. Something is wrong. The kids, the man, her laugh. Eventually, we did hike up the hill. We could see for a mile. There was nothing. No buildings, no clearings, just forest. We cut our trip short, packed up, and left before noon. Wow, you made it to the end. Thank you very much for listening. If you like the podcast, please do give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and maybe even subscribe. I post on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.